It's a miracle, all the words you bring to this voice as my heart does sing. You're the good thoughts running through our heads, the golden sun and our daily bread. You're the mountains and the ocean shore, in all heaven and earth who could ask for more? You are the eagle in its winged flight, the hoot owl song in the starry night, every baby in the mother's arms, sweetest angels that keep us from harm. What a miracle that we were born, that the sun does rise on every morn, that your love shines through the darkest night and fills us with the gift of sight. You are the trees so green that grow so tall, the hummingbirds that are oh so small, and the fire so warm, and the fire so bright, and the singing whales with all their might. You are the deepest sleep that gives us rest, the rhythms beating in our breasts, and the in and out of every breath, and the courage to do our very best. Of all the miracles before our eyes, that bring sweet joy into our lives, you gave your life, you gave it all. Your love's the greatest gift of all, the greatest miracle of all.
Beautiful, thank you. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya Avir Avir Maheti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenama Pahinityam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, O Lord, and evermore protect us by your sweet, compassionate face. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. Good morning and happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to you fathers and grandfathers and father figures and guys who come and pitch and help those of us who need men doing manly things for us. Thank you all and happy celebration. I wish we could give you a warmer, sunnier day, but we can't manage that. And tomorrow, celebrate a happy Juneteenth. That is, of course, the day when the slaves were emancipated and given freedom. So the ideal is there, whether we've achieved it or not, at least the ideal is there. So why would anyone talk on women on Father's Day? First of all, it was inadvertent. I didn't know a month ago that today was going to be Father's Day. But second of all, with every Shiva has a Shakti. Every male figure has a female figure going with it. Every divine incarnation comes with a feminine force. You don't see anything here that resembles the feminine, but the Divine Mother is behind everything here, and especially in Vedanta. So if you start from the absolute beginning of our tradition, you'll see that Sri Ramakrishna was a worshiper of the goddess Kali, the black goddess of Dakshineshwar. And Kali has 4 arms. Everybody should have them. 2 arms give boons and blessings, And 2 arms seem to be terrifying. One has a sword, one holds a human head. That means that the ego is being cut off, and the other one reminds us that Kali alone, the Divine Mother alone, does the work. We think we're doing things. It's all Divine Mother who does everything. We just think it's our work. We're deluded. So that is the very beginning of the tradition. Sri Ramakrishna was a worshiper of Kali. He encouraged the worship of the Divine Mother, and he really encouraged others to do the same thing, because it's a very pure attitude towards the divine, to assume the attitude of a child toward the mother. Sri Ramakrishna's first teacher was the Bhairavi Brahmani, a female tantric teacher. Now, for us, oh, that's cool. We don't realize that in Bengal at the time, it was extremely unusual to have a female teacher. That was really quite out of the ordinary. So she was his first teacher. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual counterpart, Sri Sarda Devi, the Holy Mother, is like a major, major, major figure in our Vedanta world. After Sri Ramakrishna did years of really extreme, difficult austerities, he worshipped Sri Sarda Devi and put all the results of all of his spiritual accomplishments, he placed them at her feet and worshipped her. So the worship of the Divine Mother is in the DNA of the Vedanta societies and the Ramakrishna order. That's who we are. If you don't see it there, you just got to little scratch the surface, and it's all about the Divine Mother. It's all about the feminine. So when we look at the Vedanta in the West, we can see how crucial a number of women were to the spreading of Vedanta and getting Vedanta where it is today. Without them, we wouldn't be where we are today. We all know, okay, in 1893, Swami Vivekananda came to Chicago to represent Hinduism at the Parliament of Religions. But what we don't know is how many other things went with that to make that such a seminal time and to get Vedanta spread throughout the country and the West. Swami Vivekananda came and he founded the first Vedanta Society in 1894 in New York City. Now, while Swami Vivekananda, during this whole time that he was in America, he had a great success at the Parliament, and after that he kind of went all over the country speaking about Vedanta. Well, the whole time, pretty much the whole time, he was staying with American families. And he was really impressed with American women. It was something he hadn't encountered before. He wrote to his brother disciples back in India. He said, "I am really struck with wonder to see the women here, how gracious the Divine Mother is to them. Most wonderful women these." It was so many women played such a significant role in not only his success, but also in spreading the message of Vedanta throughout the West, that it's kind of frustrating not to be able to speak about them all, because we got all these heroines here, but time is limited. They didn't need or want or ever get recognition. But the fact is they did it for love, and love is always its own reward. But still, to look at them and look what they did is really inspiring for the rest of us. Now, we should remember, too, without that selfless love, without that devotion of theirs, we just wouldn't be where we are today. Now, there were some Western women who really played outsized roles in Vedanta and Vivekananda's work that we even do know their names today, but it's pretty unusual. Sister Nivedita, for example. Nivedita was an absolutely heroic woman who devoted her life to doing Swami Vivekananda's work in India. She was tough, and her circumstances were even tougher. In the rainy season, she had to use an umbrella to get through her own house. That's how bad it was. She was not accepted. She was a white woman, and no one trusted her. She didn't get acceptance till there was a plague, and she went out there cleaning the streets with her hands. Then they thought, oh, maybe she does have, but people didn't want their daughters being educated. What kind of ideas were there? You shouldn't have a daughter educated. They might get ideas into their head. She fought for it. She worked for it. So she was Swamiji's soldier, and she made the sacrifices no mortal could do today. It's like you think of what she did, like, well, she died in India. She died an early death. It was a tough life. Then there was Sister Christine from Detroit. very poor woman, because it was one of Swami Vivekananda's big priorities. He said that India can never rise, the world cannot rise until women are educated. So she worked in India to educate women. Tough, again. And then there was Charlotte Sevier, who founded, with her husband, the Mayavati Ashrama up in the Himalayas. Very remote, cold area. She went there with her husband. And Swami Vivekananda had this dream of starting a center, an ashrama, up in the Himalayas that would be dedicated to the ideal of non-dualism. No shrines, no worship, just pure non-dualism up in the snows of the Himalayas. So she and her husband went there, and with a fairly short time, her husband died early. Charlotte Sevier stayed there another 15 years under very austere conditions, seriously austere. There was no heat, there was no electricity, and she worked. I mean, Devi Prana, Borda Prana, and I went and visited there in March, and the electricity went out. It happens, it's way up in the Himalayas. March, I was so cold I couldn't sleep. I was shivering in bed. I took every blanket I could find. Then I took all the contents of my suitcase out and laid them on top of me, and I still couldn't sleep because it was so cold, and I was there shivering like that. And I thought, oh my God, how do people do this? And during Charlotte Sevier's time, there was no electricity. There was no heat. There was no nothing. She was there for 15 years in absolute joy. She worked doing Swami Vivekananda's great missions. First was the spreading of Vedanta ideas, which she did because she herself helped compile the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. And she published, she and her husband got up the printing press, and then after he died, she published the Prabhupada Bharata from up there in the Himalayas. So she worked on that because that was and the other passion was serving the poor. Those were two great, so she did that. She gave her whatever wealth she had, and she gave her time and her abilities to fulfill that, and she stayed there for another 15 years. Really tough life, and did it with love. Let's turn our attention to America. Yeah. Swamiji said that in America, men are grinding all day at their work and have very little leisure, whereas the women have become very learned. Well, of course, we're talking about the educated classes. The uneducated, the hardworking, the people who didn't have money, those women did have to work, but the women who did have some sort of finances with them had time to educate themselves, and that's what they did. They used their time to devote themselves to expanding their mind, to learning new things. Now, Kate Sanborn was the first American woman to come and help Swami Vivekananda. When Swamiji arrived in Chicago, well, that was hard enough just getting over from India to Chicago. So he gets there, and he finds out that the registration it's already passed. It's too late, plus he needs a letter of introduction. He doesn't have a letter of introduction. Even worse than that, the parliament is not going to happen for a few more months, and he's run out of money. Oh, he didn't have a plan. He just figured, follow the Lord's will. But someone told him that Boston is cheaper, which is hard to believe. But so he got on a train and decided to go to Boston. Well, on this train, and you've got to imagine, you can pretty much bet $100 that there's no person on that train, or maybe even the city of Chicago, who's ever seen a live Hindu, ever. All they have are the cartoons from the missionaries, or what they think soothsayers, fortune tellers look like. So Swami Vivekananda is in his orange robes, wearing a turban, sitting on a train. You can see people are going, what? He doesn't know. He has no idea what's going to happen when he gets to Boston. Well, Kate Sanborn, who lives there, says, starts up a conversation with him. She says, come and stay in my home. You can stay as long as you want. What? How many people would do that to a total stranger? And he did. So thanks to Kate Sanborn, he gave his first talk in 1893 to a women's club. And then after that, he was, through Kate Sanborn, he actually spoke in a Christian church in Annisquam. It's like, can you imagine a Christian church inviting a Hindu Swami to come and speak? Because of, well, it happened because of her. The other major thing that we have to really thank her for was that she had connections, and she introduced Swami Vivekananda to Professor J.H. Wright, who was a professor at Harvard. Well, he met him, and Dr. Wright, Professor Wright, was so impressed with him that he said, okay, well, you're obviously, and of course, Dr. Wright just happened to be really good friends with the man who chose the delegates at the parliament. And so he wrote a letter to that man and said, this man is more learned than all of our learned professors put together. So you would think all problems solved, right? Okay, everything's going to be clean and clear now, but no. Because Swamiji, sure enough, arrived in Chicago, and he lost the address of the parliament. So he had to spend the night in a boxcar in a railway station. And he gets out the next morning, and he's in his robes with a turban, and he's sitting on a curb. It's like, you don't do that. You just don't. So this woman looks out her window. Her name is Ellen Hale. She looks out her window and says, he must be a delegate to the Parliament of Religions. So she goes out and invites him into her home, and then invites him to stay there with them. Now, this woman has 2 daughters and 2 nieces that are living with her. Can you imagine anyone today finding a total stranger sitting on a curb saying, come and live with me, with my 2 daughters and my 2 nieces? Yeah, she did. And as fate would have it, that family became his family and his American headquarters. That family played an extremely significant role in his life. The father became known as Father Pope. Ellen Hale became known as Mother Church. And he had relationships with every one of the daughters. It was like big brother and little sister. Particularly with Mary Hale, who was one of the daughters, who was smart and funny and impish. So he wrote her one of the most beautiful letters ever written. He wrote her, may I be born again and again and suffer thousands of miseries so that I may worship the only God that I believe exists, the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls, and above all, my God the wicked, my God the poor, and my God the miserable of all species, of all races. That is the special object of my worship. Now that was not something that was preached a lot. And that's what he wrote her in a letter. She also told him that he ought to speak more nicely to the right people. And he wrote her back, he said, I don't have time for that. My time on this earth is short. I'm going to speak the truth, and if they don't like it, fine. So she would write him doggerel verses, and he would write back doggerel verses saying exactly what he said. It was a lovely relationship. Now, that family was his family. And then he gained another family in New York, the Leggett family, which included Frank Leggett, the first president of the First Vedanta Society, which was in New York City. Frank and the Leggett connection is really important here, which I'll explain later on. Frank and Sarah Bull paid for the publication of his books. Now, book publishing that time was hot type press. Books were cherished. They were expensive, and they paid for it all because they were so committed to getting the words of Vivekananda out to the public. So Betty and her sister Josephine McLeod met Swami Vivekananda at his 1895-1896 talks in New York City. They were extremely important for a number of people that had changed their lives. Now, we have a connection with Josephine McLeod here. Josephine McLeod, a.k.a. Tontine, was the aunt of Prasanna, who lived right across the street from us. And so we heard from Prasanna, who lived there, about her aunt Tontine and what her memories were about Swami Vivekananda. And she also Prasanna had memories of Swami Vivekananda too when she was 2 years old, and he would roll pennies for her to play with. So there's a very strong connection with us and the Leggetts. And our president some years back was Carl Whitmarsh, was again a member of the Leggett family. So we have a direct connection there. So the Leggett family became his family, and they had a beautiful country estate in Upper State New York, Ridgely Manor, which is now part of the Vedanta Society of Southern California, because of course a state up in New York City, up in New York State would be a part of us, right? But it's a beautiful place, and I encourage all of you, if you ever can, to get to our Ridgely Manor in Upper State New York. It's gorgeous and has a fantastic atmosphere. So Josephine McLeod, Betty Leggett's sister, played an enormous role in Swami Vivekananda's life and in his work and his basically the spreading of Vedanta across the country. Swamiji said about her, Jo, he said, "I simply adore Jo. She is a feminine statesman. She can wield a kingdom I have seldom seen such strong yet common good sense in any human being." Jo, that is Tontine, considered the spreading of Swami Vivekananda's message to be like her personal mission in life. That was her goal. And Jo was completely at ease in high society. She knew all the right people in all the right places, and she was a master at introducing people to the right people to get everything done that needs to be done. She could make wheels turn that no one else sort of had the ability to do. For example, the British government, in their great wisdom, was going to put a railway path through Dakshineshwar, in fact, right through the Panchavati, where Sri Ramakrishna had done all of his great austerities. It's one of the great pilgrimage places, right? It's through there. So Josephine McLeod was well-educated, well-placed, and beautifully mannered. And so she made an appointment with the consul general. I suspect they had tea together. And she said to him, she could be quite imperious. And she said, "Absolutely not." And they said, "All right." And they moved it someplace else because she could. So it was wonderful having a person in those positions, being able to influence those people. But her great mission in life was to get Swamiji's words published and out there, along with books about Swami Vivekananda. For example, in 1935, Jo met Jean Hébert, who she encouraged. She liked him a lot, and he was interested in Vivekananda. She said, "Good. You translate into French the 4 yogas, all those 4 yogas of Swami Vivekananda, and inspired talks. You translate them into French, and I will support you while you do so." So he did. And he became one of the first translators at the UN, Jean Hébert. So in 1936, she had a lot of contacts all around the world. In 1936, there was a centennial of Sri Ramakrishna's birth. And it was celebrated in Paris at the Sorbonne. Well, who do you think had something to do with that? Of course, Josephine McLeod. So she spoke for 5 minutes in French on Vedanta and Swami Vivekananda, and Swami Yatishwarananda, Swami Brahmananda's great disciple, spoke in English for 5 minutes. Because of that crucial meeting, the Vedanta Society in France, in Gretz, right outside Paris, was started. And that's because of her. Because of that. That's how it started. And now it's called the Centre Vedantique Ramakrishna, and our Swami Atmarupananda is the head of the center there. You will remember he's one of ours from Southern California. He's now the head of the center. So thank you, Josephine McLeod. She also suggested, she knew, because that time, it was such an intellectual society, and you needed someone who could rise to that level of intellectual expertise and conversation. So she wrote the head of the Ramakrishna order, Swami Shivananda, disciple Ramakrishna, who was the president of the order. She said, I think Swami Siddheshwarananda would be the perfect person there. And she paid for his fare, and sure enough, he was sent over, and it was a great success. And so it's been ever since then. So Josephine McLeod also discovered Don Gopal Mukherjee, who was in Stanford, teaching in Stanford. How she met him, God only knows. But she decided that he needed to write about Swami Vivekananda, so she loaded books about Swami Vivekananda on him. And he said, she said, "You need to write about Swami Vivekananda." And he said, "Mm-mm." And he wrote about Sri Ramakrishna, called The Face of Silence. So that actually turned out pretty well, because that book fell into the hands of Romain Rolland in Paris, or in France, who happened to have just won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And so Josephine McLeod took herself to Switzerland, where he was staying, and said, "You need to write about Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda," and loaded books on him, and got him in touch with Swami Shivananda, the head of the order, and Swami Ashokananda, who was then he was the editor of Prabhupada Bharata and would later be the head of our San Francisco Center. Brilliant mind who knew his Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna backwards and forwards, and was a very compelling presence. She got him in touch with them, and indeed he did write The Life of Sri Ramakrishna and The Life of Vivekananda, which were ensured a wide readership because, hello, he was a Nobel Prize in Literature, and people actually read during that time. They weren't like on their screens, they weren't watching something as on Netflix, they were reading, because that's what people did. You either sat around the piano and sang, or listened to if you had one of those machines, one of those, yes, or you read, and books were widely read. So it was a huge coup to get those books written by someone like Romain Rolland. Swamiji placed great trust in her. She saw herself not as his disciple, but I am his friend. And she was proud of that. You're never, of course, supposed to ever wear shoes inside a shrine. But when she went to Bellarmont, she wore her black lace-up shoes into the shrine because she was Swami Vivekananda's friend, and nobody was going to cross her, because they knew how revered and loved she was by everybody. He wrote her a letter that said, "After all, Joe, I'm only the boy who used to listen with rapt wonderment to the wonderful words of Sri Ramakrishna under the banyan tree at Dakshineshwar. Now I again hear his voice, the same old voice thrilling my soul. I come, O Lord, I come. I'm glad I was born, glad I suffered so, glad I did make big blunders, glad to enter peace." That was not long before he died. He died very young, age 39, in 1902. Now, Josephine McLeod's dear friend Sarah Bull also had that ability to make things happen. Sarah Bull was the daughter of the governor of Wisconsin. She married when I think she was 18. Ole Bull, who was in his 40s, 50s, who was one of the most renowned violinists in the world. In fact, if you go to the mall in Washington, D.C., and you go into the Museum of Culture, you see there on display Ole Bull's violin. Great Norwegian violinist. He's still revered today as one of the greatest that ever lived. She married him, and they were very happy. But of course, she was much younger. He was much older. He died fairly young. He died when she was young. So she was a highly educated, highly cultured woman, and she had contacts everywhere. And this made a huge difference in the work of Vedanta spreading through these women. So she saw Swamiji at those 1895 classes and invited Swamiji to speak at her home in Cambridge, Mass, right outside of Harvard, where she had these soirees, where all these people with the highest intellectual accomplishments would meet and greet and have these meetings together. And she invited Swamiji to the Cambridge conferences there in her home, which is I've been in there, it's a very large home, gracious, beautiful home. Well, there he happened to meet William James, the renowned psychologist who wrote the book Varieties of Religious Experience, which is still being used in religious studies classes today. He was one of the first American psychologists, and that book's still in print today. Well, he met Vivekananda, they became friends, and he was so impressed with him. There's a large chunk of Raja Yoga. Swamiji's book, Raja Yoga, is in that book, Varieties of Religious Experience, which is still being widely read today. Through Sarah Bull, Swamiji was invited to speak at Harvard's Philosophical School. That was a big deal, to speak at Harvard in their philosophy in the philosophical department. And the lecture that he gave there, Vedanta philosophy, was taken down, and it's still in print today. Swamiji had an extraordinary relationship with Sarah Bull, who he literally saw as his mother. He tended to form family relationships with those close to him. We already Mother Church and Father Pope. He literally saw Sarah Bull as his mother. He said, through the mercy of Sri Ramakrishna, my instinct sizes up almost immediately and infallibly a human face as soon as I see it. And the result of this is this: you may do anything you please with my affairs. I will not even murmur. I regard you as my mother, and I will always abide by any advice you give me. Now, this is the man who argued vehemently with Sri Ramakrishna at every step for 4 years without a break. This is the man who is well known for his sharp wit and for his truthfulness come what may. And for her, it would be yes. Why? Why did he have such enormous regard for her? And I finally found out. He wrote her this letter. He said, you have been the one friend to whom Sri Ramakrishna has become the goal of life. This is the secret of my trust in you, the one person. Such was his trust in her, and this blows my mind, that he put Sarah Bull in charge of all the Vedanta work in the country, in the United States. He put her in charge of it. Wow. He said to her, you have my implicit confidence in all works in the U.S., and I trust everything there to you. I'm not saying so. So at this point, we need to backtrack a bit, because there are some earlier women that we have to be really grateful for, and we got to mention their names. He said, okay, we all know about the 1893 Parliament of Religions. The 1895-1896 classes that he gave in New York City were stunning as well, because they transformed a whole bunch of people. Classes were held by Swami Vivekananda in this dingy, small apartment in a lousy part of town. And he was warned by some of his upper crust friends that the right sort of people would not go to a place like that. And he said, too bad. And he had the classes. It was so crowded that people were literally sitting in windowsills. If there had been rafters, they would have been hanging from them. It was so crowded that eventually they were forced to move out into a larger apartment. And finally, they had to move to halls where a larger amount of people could come. Those classes were so electrifying that they deeply inspired any number of people, and it was really instrumental in getting Vedanta across the country. And a lot of the people that we talk about were part of that group. Betty Leggett, that we already talked about. Josephine McLeod. Mary Dutcher. Good old Mary Dutcher, a big, hefty Methodist woman, a good old gal. But she loved those 1895 talks, and she had a summer home in upper state New York in Thousand Island Park. So she said, well, come and stay at my place in the summer. So he did for 7 weeks. And he had the most dedicated students came there to study with him, and he gave classes every day. And those classes, those notes were transcribed by Ellen Waldo, another one of those 1895 transformed people. And those notes eventually became inspired talks. Now, that house that Mary Dutcher gave over to Vedanta work has become the gift that keeps on giving, because those inspired talks not only inspired those people in Thousand Island, they're continuing to inspire people today. It's still transforming people's lives even today. So Ellen Waldo, who took those notes and who, she was really a foundational figure in Vedanta today. Swamiji had enormous faith in her, and he dictated in New York City Raja Yoga to her, which she took down and made it in, and it became a book through her notes. She was also the first person that Swami ever asked to teach Vedanta in this country. It was Ellen Waldo. Ellen Waldo. Sister Devamata wrote about, she was another one of those 1895 people, Sister Devamata, said that Ellen's service to Swamiji was really like unbelievable. She said her service was continuous and it was untiring. She said she cooked, she edited, she cleaned, she took dictation from Swamiji, which went on for hours. She taught, and she managed the center. She read the proofs, and she saw the visitors. Now, she lived in Brooklyn. He was in Manhattan. It took her 2 hours to get from her place to his place. So she'd leave early in the morning, get there for her place to get there, work the whole day through, all the way into the night, go back and revisit, go back to Brooklyn at night. Next morning, do the same thing with joy and just great, yes, joy and love, joy and love. That's how she did the whole thing. Swami Vivekananda had enormous faith in her capabilities. He told her, I will be 1,000 times more pleased than to see one of you start than any number of Hindus, even if he is one of my brethren, even if he's one of the, we're talking about Swami Sardananda was there, Swami Vedananda. He said, I want one of you to do it. I want one of you to start classes. You start doing it. He had enormous faith in her. He said, I want you to score success in America. We quoted Devamata talking about Ellen, but she was again one of those 1895-96 people who did an enormous amount for Vedanta in this country. She, of course, and Devamata were very close friends. Now, Ellen took those notes at Thousand Island Park, which eventually became Inspired Talks, but basically Ellen Waldo only had 43 pages of raw notes, like notepaper notes. She didn't know how it would ever become a book. So Devamata said, I've got an idea, let me try. So every night she'd go to her place, work on the notes, and then come back and show them, Devamata would, and then show them to Ellen the next day. What do you think about this? Yes, yes. By the time it was done, every day, Devamata would take those raw notes, make them into a book. She would go back to Ellen Waldo, does this work? Yes. Until it was a final book, and at that point, Ellen Waldo said, yes, this is it. And we're going to give it the title, Inspired Talks. Devamata went to India for 2 years, and she lived with Swami Ramakrishnanda in Madras, which was unthinkably hot. She lived there for 2 years and asked him to read the book, and he gave it 100% approval. Now, when a close disciple of Ramakrishna says, yes, this is it for Swamiji, you know she got it right. Devamata lived in very difficult conditions, but she lived directly with Swami Ramakrishnananda and also with Maharaj Swami Brahmananda for 6 months. Now, again, it's really hard to emphasize how much Vedanta really spread through literature, through books, through journals. And she was one who wrote so much and inspired so many people through Vedanta writings. She did so much because books had a huge impact at that time. Devamata had a huge literary contribution. She wrote Days in the Indian Monastery, which is a wonderful book. I encourage you to read that. Another one, Sri Ramakrishna and His Disciples. Not Ramakrishna and His Disciples, was Christopher Isherwood wrote, but her book, Sri Ramakrishna and His Disciples, about her own experiences with living with Swami Ramakrishnananda, Swami Brahmananda, Holy Mother Sri Sardadeti. These people she lived with. It's a very inspiring book. She wrote that. She wrote the early version of the sayings of Sri Ramakrishna, which a lot of us was started about reading these books. She took notes from her guru, Swami Paramananda, who was disciple of Swami Vivekananda. Those notes became a book of daily thoughts and prayers. From his letters, she created the path of devotion and the way of peace and blessedness from letters, from excerpts that he wrote her. This was all her stuff. And the other thing is it's only Devamata's writings and her notes that we have any idea what Swami Vivekananda was doing in 1895, 1896. No one in India knew. He was over here. She took extensive notes and wrote reports. All those went back to India. They're now in the complete works now, her writing. All those things were Devamata. And she did untiringly and unstintingly. When Paramananda, who was gone, she was in Boston with him. When he'd be gone for 6 months at a time, traveling across the country, talking about Vedanta or going to India, She managed the center. She gave all the lectures, she gave the classes, she ran the center for 6 months at a time. So, and now another very significant figure. Okay, we're celebrating women on Father's Day. Got to do it. Okay. You guys get your time all the time, right? time to talk about the American women. So, Sarah Farmer inaugurated these conferences in Maine that were called the Green Acre Conferences, which were kind of like a flourishing of sort of early New Age talks and discussions. It was during this time there was a lot of what they called New Thought movement. There was a metaphysical movement. There was the Divine Society. So all these things, these were kind of percolating on the surface. And this was a place to have a huge audience where people would listen. So Sarah Farmer thought, perfect. She attended, of course, the Parliament of Religions, and she was impressed by Vivekananda and said, this is a perfect place for him to be. Invited him, and he came and he spoke there. This made a big impression because so many of the people attending that were not only the New Age, like folks like, the hoi polloi, it was the teachers of New Age thought. They were they were there, and they were really struck by Swami Vivekananda. Devamata attended that, and she wrote this. She said, among the most eager students were a number of teachers, each with a blank book in his hand, and every one of Swami Vivekananda's words was punctuated by the tap of their pencils as they literally took down every word that he spoke. Not one sentence went unrecorded, she says. And she said, and I'm sure that if you made a circuit of New York with all the New Age, divine science, metaphysical thought, you would have heard everywhere Vedanta and yoga in more or less diluted form. Because no time would they say Vedanta or Swami Vivekananda. They would put it forth in their own way, in their own words. And this is how so much Vedanta got into the American mainstream from a very early time. That's why so many people gained these ideas, not through ever hearing about Vedanta, or God help us, Vedanta, because they can never spell it right, or to have heard the name Vivekananda, let alone Sri Ramakrishna. It was from these early outlets of these early teachers. And these ideas started percolating in American society because these ideas came and were incorporated and accepted by Americans at a fairly early time. When you think of how many people today believe in reincarnation, believe in, for example, and many Americans, most actually, will be cremated. There is nothing in the Judeo-Christian tradition that ever would say that this is an okay thing. There is nothing in there. But they were accepted more and more. And as these ideas spread, the name Vedanta wasn't there, Vivekananda wasn't there, Ramakrishna. But these ideas were spreading and spreading by word of mouth through various teachers, starting with that 1893 Parliament and going to places like this Green Acre Conference. So this is how Vedanta these ideas became accepted without people even knowing that these ideas were kind of making an impact on their own mind, that they were getting through to people. Then we have another Sarah, got to do it, Sarah Fox, who was deeply influenced by seeing Swami Vivekananda in San Francisco in 1900. She said once she heard it was the most wonderful thing she'd ever heard in her life. So after he left, she became very involved in San Francisco Vedanta, and then was deeply influenced by Swami Atulananda, who was one of the first American Swamis of the order, probably the first American Swami of the order. And he said, why don't you come to India? I'm going back there. She said, okay. And she lived there for 3 years and took initiation from Swami Sardananda, Ramakrishna's great disciple and Holy Mother's attendant. When she came back, she then started living in Oakland. She was then living in Oakland, and she decided she was going to really work on Vedanta work in Oakland. So she worked and worked and worked to get Vedanta groups at her home with weekly meetings on Vedanta. And they were really very successful. So successful that soon the new Swami in San Francisco, Swami Ashokananda, who we already met, who had become the head of the San Francisco Center, started coming over and giving lectures. And they were more and more popular. And he soon realized There had to be a Vedanta center in the East Bay. So then she worked very hard to actually get the Vedanta center going, because even in Berkeley, in the 1930s, it was a very, very racist place. They did not want non-white people around. And so Sarah Fox was very significant in making sure that that happened. She was the first president of the Berkeley Vedanta Society and was president from 1939 to 1949. Swami Ashokananda said that she was the most spiritual person that he had ever met in the West. And he was sort of like a non-demonstrative sort of Swami. But I heard from Madhavaprana, our senior nun in San Francisco, that the only time she ever saw him shed a tear was at the memorial for Sarah Fox. So, we go south to Los Angeles, down to LA, because there we meet the Mead sisters, who were very influential in spreading Vedanta both in Northern and Southern California. Swami Vivekananda came to LA, and he deeply inspired a bunch of people, so the Mead sisters went from their home in Pasadena to LA, and they were just electrified. So they went and they said, "Oh, why don't you come and stay with us?" And he said, "No, thank you, that's fine, that's all right." And then several days later, he showed up at their house with his baggage and said, "I've come to stay with you." And they went, "Great!" So that house is now Swami Vivekananda House and belongs to the Vedanta Society of Southern California. There's going to be an open house, I think the second week of July. I hope you go there. It's a wonderful place. Our Swami Vrajaprana is the resident Swami there. So he stayed and he gave classes there. And he gave classes there. He gave classes in Los Angeles. And so Alice, one of the sisters, said, I think we should have Vedanta societies in both places. And he said, Swamiji said it won't last. But she tried, and the effect was there, because 30 years later, in the home of Alice's sister, Carrie, the first Vedanta Society of Southern California was started. That greenhouse that was the first Vedanta Society is the greenhouse in the Hollywood Center. You can all go in, it's part of the bookstore right now. That's where her house was. So Alice went up with Swami Vivekananda up to Northern California, and she did an enormous amount of work while he lectured and lectured and lectured. And Swami Vivekananda said, he said, "Alice, the second of the Mead sisters is here, and she was working to help me." He said about the Mead sisters, "Lord bless their hearts. Seeing such souls repays for all the nonsense of this life." It was hard. Alice kept the fires of Vedanta alive both in Northern and Southern California. She never spared herself. And Swamiji wrote all the three sisters. He said, "You three sisters have become part of my mind forever." Now, Alice's sister Carrie, later known as Sister Lalita, or just Sister, suffered a huge loss. She was one of the sisters when in 1925 her only child, her son, was killed in a mining accident. And she was already a widow. And she lost her only child. And she was engulfed in grief for 3 years. And then she was up in Portland, and she just decided she would go to the Vedanta Society. And there she met Swami Pravrajika, the founder of our Vedanta Society of Southern California. And Swami Pravrajika was having a very difficult time in Portland because, you all know Oregon. Imagine it in the 1920s. It was a very, very racist place. He couldn't buy property, couldn't do anything. So Carrie said, "Why don't you come to my home and start a Vedanta Society in Los Angeles and Hollywood?" And the rest is history. So he did. And we've been here ever since, thanks to her. She was one of the most saintly people anyone had ever met. Swami Prabhavananda said, he said, "She is a saint." Our senior nuns that we knew, Bordaprana, Prabhaprana, Satyaprana, all of them said she was absolutely a saint. You could never hear her open or close the door. She was that quiet. She once apologized to Swami Prabhavananda. She said, I'm sorry it takes me so long to prostrate. She said, it takes me sometimes a long time to see the light. As if, everybody sees a light before when they're prostrating in the shrine. It's like, not really. So there's one more person we have to mention, and that's Bhakti. Helen Rubel, who is an ardent disciple of Swami Akhilananda, disciple of Brahmananda, who lived in in Providence, Rhode Island, and Boston Center. Both the centers were combined at that time. And she went over one day and went to his office and put a big pile of money on his desk. And he was like, what to do with this? So he got into contact with Swami Shivananda, the president, and said, would it be possible to give this money to build the temple of Sri Ramakrishna at Bellarmont? And Swami Shivananda cabled him back, that is why Sri Ramakrishna has sent you to America. So the money went there, and because of that, we have Sri Ramakrishna's temple at Bellarmont, which is the main building. It is the focal point for us of an Indian pilgrimage, going there. Swamiji was once asked, Swami, who is it that supports the monks in your country? And without missing a beat, he said, the same people who do it in your country, madam, the women. And so it has been. Swami Satprakashananda, the founder of our St. Louis Center, had a really rough time because it was really, 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 and still continues to be a very racist place. It was very hard. He couldn't do anything, couldn't work. It was really rough. And he was coming back late on a train, and he was, kind of demoralized by how hard it was. And he was sat there in the train was running late. And he thought, why am I here? And then when he pulled into the station, he saw a woman waiting for him. And he thought, that's why I'm here. There's so many unsung heroines, and they didn't want thanks, they didn't expect thanks, but I would just like to say thank you.
A gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. When we find ourselves in a place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we shan't be ashamed. Turn, turn will be our delight, to by turning, turning we come round right. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we found ourselves in a place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight.
Thank you for that American anthem. Gorgeous. So we have a big week coming up. Oh, yeah. Okay, first of all, this coming Saturday, we will have Swami Yogatmananda from Providence here to give a retreat, and that retreat will be on, I'm trying to read it, I can't see very well. Okay. On The Prophet, Khalil Gibran's book, The Prophet, and that will be from 10 to 3 p.m. You can either bring a bag lunch or you can bring some food, and we'll eat down in the convent, and the retreat will be right here. And the following Sunday, he will give a talk at 11 o'clock on the open secret. This Wednesday, at our Wednesday 5 p.m. class, we're going to begin a new book, Memories of a Loving Soul, a book about Swami Premananda written by Swami Prabhavananda. And next Saturday there will not be a gospel reading because we have a full day retreat. So why would you need a anyway? Okay, I'll close with a chant. Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnan Jagadgurum Padme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Salutations to Holy Mother Sri Sardadevi. Salutations to Sri Ramakrishna, the universal teacher. Salutations to them again and again. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. And happy Father's Day, y'all. Happy Father's Day.